Hello, everybody. I hope everyone's having a great Good Friday. Today, we're going to be going over kind of like a review of chapter 1 and 2, Anxious for Nothing by Max Lucado. Last week, we talked about what anxiety is, what it feels like, how it burdens our lives, how we can become trapped in our anxiety. We talked about how anxiety is very normal and everyone deals with it, but it's just how we let it control our lives. And then in chapter 2, we talked a little bit more of the Lord's sovereignty and rejoicing in the Lord's sovereignty. And so today we're going to go through some of the questions that is in this book, kind of for like a almost self-reflection, um, identifying some of the triggers, our reactions to stress, how we're handling the control that anxiety has over us sometimes, and how that overall affects our joy and our gentleness. Um, I'm going to start by asking the question, is your heart weighed down with worry? And this is something that Max Lucado mentions in his book. And it's something that I used to really let control me. I think a lot of the time it was from watching it generationally in my family. My grandma, she's a worrywart. My mom's a worrywart. I always watched them worry about things that they had no control over, or even things that even haven't even happened yet. And the biggest thing with that is especially like what other people thought. I grew up in kind of like a family where we have to not necessarily keep up with the Joneses, but we have to make sure the Joneses aren't judging us. And I think that's something that has stuck with me, and I'm still trying to like get through. Um, and in reality, it's things that aren't even there. Something that I've seen recently is we shouldn't worry about what other people think about us because they crucified the most perfect man in the world. And if they can do that, then is their judgment even really a good judgment? I don't think so whatsoever. Um, Another thing I want to ask is, what are some signals of anxiety? And for me, it could be just that overwhelming feeling that everybody probably experiences. It's uncomfortable, extremely uncomfortable. I know personally when I have really bad anxiety over things that I don't even know that's going to happen, my body will break out in hives. I think that runs in my family as well. My body will break out in hives, my chest, and then that almost like uncomfortable stomach feeling, like not necessarily like I'm going to throw up, but your stomach's turning. Like maybe you just got off a roller coaster. Um, And then another thing is holding my breath. It's almost like I get stuck in a state of, I want to say fight or flight, but Max Lucado, he does make a mention in his book, the difference between fear and anxiety, and I do think they go hand in hand. Um,
Is it panic?
Almost. It's like the beginning panic. Um, but instead of panicking at all, I'll just almost stay still. And it's like,
Like in a trance?
yeah, almost like a trance. And sometimes I'll just isolate myself completely, and that's usually what I do when I don't know what to do with my anxiety. Another thing when we go into like reaction to stress, it's how do you react to the unexpected? And I asked my mom this question actually today, and she couldn't answer it, but I could answer it for her. Me and her are very similar when it comes to dealing with our stress. We like to put all the pressure on ourselves, and if we can't get it done by ourselves, we feel weak, and we are not allowed to feel weak, quote unquote, which is almost how we feel. And it's almost like embarrassing. So we don't go and we don't tell anybody, because if we are weak, that's not a good thing, I guess. But I learned from especially watching like the outcomes of what that can do to you. I learned to stop putting all the pressure on myself, because that I one thing I learned is I can't give it all to myself. I have to give it to God, some of it to God. And once I've done that and I've released some of that pressure off of myself, um, I kind of am in content that I know everything will work out in the end. Maybe not in the way that I want to or I want it to work out, but everything will be okay in the end, and it'll work out in some way where things will function again. And I think that really helps me with the reaction to it, is knowing that I can talk to God, do things that I need to do on my part without overworking myself, and it'll all figure itself out. Um, but before, it used to not be like that at all. I would run away, shut down. Like I said, the isolation. I would stay in my room for days because I don't want people to know that I'm stressed out about something. And saying that out loud is kind of silly, but in the moment, that's how I felt. Um, and that's where I kind of get into like the handling the control of it all. In what ways do you instinctively react to moments of uncertainty and stress? And that kind of goes hand in hand with the question I just asked. But I said it earlier, I isolate myself. I like to make it almost my mission to solve it all. And growing up, I lived with my grandma, and I've also lived with my mom, and they're very similar people. And I also kind of got that trait where I feel like I have to solve it all, and I overdo myself to the point where letting somebody in or telling them that I need help is embarrassing, or even I sometimes get self-conscious that people are thinking are seeking attention, which is silly to think, but um, I don't know. It's just like it feels like I'm scared that other people are going to have judgment on me being struggling. And so a lot of the time I just isolated myself until I could feel better. And most of the time I never really felt better. I always had to face myself, and I had to deal with things, and I had to let somebody in. But in between that, I would drag myself through the mud. And now I realize I don't have to drag myself through the mud when I can just talk to somebody, or I can talk to God, give it to God, and know that He'll help me figure it out in one way or another.
Do you think any of that is because you're a competitive person?
Yeah, very much so. I think pride is one of my issues, and I kind of mention it in the next question. I think that letting somebody in is like destroying an ego. Um, but now I'm working on the fact that who cares? That's what I really keep trying to repeat in my head. Like, who cares? Like not in the sense that nobody cares about me, but in the sense like nobody's judging me. Like, who cares? Because in reality, nobody is. Sometimes I have to think of my own perspective and apply it to other people's, and that helps me because I'm not ever judging anybody else for them struggling. I'm not judging anybody else for going through things. And so once I apply that to their perspective, almost, it helps me realize that nobody is thinking those things but myself.
But that's what anxiety is.
Yeah.
It's that deception of perception.
Mm-hmm.
That's not reality.
Right. And I really do have to ground myself a lot when it comes to that. But I do have a good tip. I went bowling the other day with a group of people, and one of the girls had her boyfriend there, and he said, I don't know how you do some of the things you do because I would be so embarrassed. And that was probably one of the biggest compliments I could have ever gotten, because it shows that me working on myself and not caring what other people think, like, I don't know, it gave me a little bit of satisfaction because when I'm repeating in my head and what the grounding that I'm doing for myself is working, and I can embarrass myself without being embarrassed.
There's a freedom to that in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, people see it as like a token of confidence. And I've even had people say, I wish I could do the things you do because I feel self-conscious about doing it myself. And I was there at one point too. And so, I try my best to befriend those people and help them as much as I can because I was that person at one time. And then another one of these questions is kind of getting into like the joy assessment of anxiety in it all. And it's, in your life, have you found it difficult or natural to rejoice in the Lord? And I wouldn't say it was difficult in the sense where I didn't think the Lord could help me. I always knew I could turn to Him and He would help me. But it goes back to the ego thing. I would know, I would have to confess my weakness almost. I would have to confess that I couldn't do it all by myself. And so for the longest time, I would turn away. But the thing is with the Lord, He doesn't really let that happen. He always made me face myself, and He always made me turn to Him at the end of the day. So kind of going through that trial and error so many times, I realized I don't have to, it's okay to have that kind of weakness. It's okay to turn to Him and ask for help and give it to Him, because I know that I don't need to put myself through the pressure of trying to fill an ego that's not really existent.
Yeah, one thing I think is important, Alexis, is when we're weak, we're strong in Him.
Mhm.
Okay? When we feel our own strength, we have alienated Him.
Yeah. Mhm.
So to feel weak or to feel, I don't know exactly what to do in this situation, is exactly where the Lord wants us to be, because His desire is that we're dependent upon Him,
Mhm.
because He already knows the outcome.
Right. Mhm. And it took a long time for me to trial and error to get that understanding. And that I still don't even have it all the way. But yeah.
You're in good company, because none of us do.
Yeah, that's good to hear. The next one of this is, do you consider yourself a gentle person? Which I really thought about this question. And when I went through my rebellious stage and I was just trying to take control of everything in my life, I was skipping school because I didn't want to go. I was doing things that I wasn't supposed to, hanging out with people I wasn't supposed to, going out when I wasn't supposed to. I found myself in that state of, I don't care about anybody, instead of I don't care about what they think. I don't care about anybody. And I was rigid and I was mean. And if somebody looked at me, it was almost like, what are you looking at type of person. And it really eats me up inside. I hate being that kind of person, but I was filled with insecurity, and I think that's what it was. And I blamed everybody else around me for it. And I wanted them to almost feel the insecurity that I felt inside. And I was like ready for war.
I think that's called mean-spirited.
Yes, very mean-spirited. If somebody, I was like almost waiting for somebody to say something mean about them. So
It was a mean-spirited directed, it really wasn't directed at them.
No.
It was directed at some other situation.
Right. It was definitely rooted in something else, but I took that, instead of dealing with it properly, like I said, I blamed everybody else and I wanted war. I wanted war with everybody, but in reality, I was in war with myself, if that makes sense. But now I would I would consider myself more of a gentle person, because I'm able to sit and think more clearly. I think that also comes with age a little bit, and just knowledge. A lack of knowledge really, I think, was the reason for the reaction that I had in the past, because everyone still feels some kind of insecurity every once in a while, if not constantly sometimes. And it's about reframing the situation. And I think I've gotten a lot better with that.
There's what's called a Napoleon complex, and that is the people that come across the most self-assured are the most insecure,
Mhm.
because they're using that facade of self-assurance as a barrier for dealing with major insecurity.
Mhm. I always used to say, fake it until you make it. And that's what it was.
That's what it was.
Exactly what it was. Um, And then the last question I have for today is almost like a focus kind of reassessment, focus check. And it's what challenges are testing your gentleness right now? And I thought about this one, and I didn't really have to think very hard. And I think I'm really challenged with patience right now. And that also goes in the sense of control, where when things are hard or when there's a situation that I know I have to go through and it's not going to be easy, I just want it to be over in my time. And as much as it is uncomfortable to go through and deal with the things I have to deal with, um, I have to come back to the reality that it's not going to be done on my time. It's going to be done on God's time, and that He has a plan, and it's not the plan that I have in mind. And that's what I have to keep reinforcing in my brain. But when I think that way, that I need to control the situation, or I need to do this, I need to figure this out for my own sake, or whatever it may be, it just gives me that overwhelming sense of anxiety that I don't need, because in reality, I can't do anything about it. And I know that I need to give it to God and He will figure it out. And I need to lean on God, because I don't need to be going throughout my day completely, utterly stressed out and anxiety ridden because I can't do anything about it. And a lot of the time, that anxiety turns into anger. And what that does is it completely makes me hyper focus on my anger. And anger often leads into the behavior of anger, and that never really has good consequence. So that's something that I definitely need to work on right now. But after that, that is the end of the questions from chapter 1 and 2 on my part. I'm going to give it to you to go over some.
There's a few things that continue to stand out to me.
Yeah.
And in chapter 2, Max Lucado, he talks about control. And whether we want to admit it or not, most of us have a significant problem with control. Part of it is how we were raised. Part of it is growing up in the Midwest, and a few other, there's some genetic factors that go along with that. But he makes a statement in here that perceived control creates calm. Lack of control gives birth to fear. And if you take it at face value, it means if we're controlling it, then we're going to have less and less anxiety. But what he's referring to is the control he's referring to is what's called the sovereignty of God. And I want to go over what that means, because I think if you get a better sense of that, you may have a little better understanding of who's in control of your life. So, some key aspects of God's sovereignty is, first of all, He's supreme. He's the absolute ruler. He is the controller of all creation, heaven and earth, and humans. He has the ultimate power and knowledge to allow to direct all events to His purposeful will. There are 4 key aspects of sovereignty and His absolute authority. God has the final say over nations, over nature, over our individual lives. And that comes out of Psalms 115:3. He also has purposeful control, which means everything, including seemingly random events, serves God's ultimate wise and holy purpose. He also has unthwartable plans. No creature, including human beings, or any spiritual powers, can successfully stop what God has ordained. And I think that's part of that new age mindset that has permeated our culture probably in the last 25, 30 years, that there are powers, there are forces of nature that exceed God's understanding his ability to deal with it. And it's one of those great deceptions that people fall into far too often. But the reality of it is that nothing at all can overstep God's power, timing, or authority. And then the last one is the orchestration of events. God is not a distant ruler. He actively works all things, even our choices, in accordance with his plan. And I think this is important because we've all been prone to making really unwise choices in our life, whether it's during our teenage years, whether it's our 20s, 30s, or much older. We're all subject to not rely on the Lord for his insight and wisdom, and we just take it upon ourselves to make these choices. Seemingly unexpected consequences will occur from that. And then when they do occur, the natural tendency is to blame God, as if he was the one to make that choice. He didn't make the choice. He gave us free choice. He gave us a free will to choose, recognizing in those choices there are always consequences. There are good consequences and there are bad consequences. But the point of it is that anything that we do passes before the eyes and the hand of God. And he allows certain choices to occur in our life. We see it as punishment. We see it as failure, but he's able to take those situations and turn those into some of the greatest learning that we could ever hope for. A learning that you can't get through an education system, through even other people. It originates and it ends with God himself. So I wanted to spend just a few moments on that, on the sovereignty of God, and recognizing that when we can depend and rely on him and his sovereignty, our anxiety does turn to calmness. It's generally when we don't focus on him or we don't rely on him that it becomes a gridlock, which results in ongoing anxiety, stress, and what we'll talk about next week is guilt. So I wanted to touch base on that. I guess the one question I have is, if we understand sovereignty, what does it mean in our everyday life? How do we go about relying on that rather than our own self-control mechanisms that we use? And I think the answer is going to be, are we willing to yield to him? Are we willing to surrender our finite understanding of things to rely on his infinite knowledge? And that is very difficult in the Christian walk. There are times it's so natural, and there are some days it is the most difficult thing to do, and you may spend the whole day deliberating whether you're going to surrender. Mm-hmm. So it's a process, and I think that's what the Christian walk is. It's a process. It's not trial by error. It's dependency upon him, allowing him to more orchestrate what his will is, what his plans are for our lives. And there are times that his plans and our plans coincide. But the key to that will be, will we allow him to orchestrate his steps to fulfilling that plan? And that gets into, again, another control issue, because, as Alexis said, our timing is not his timing. And we live in a culture right now where everything has to be immediate, like within a second or a minute. And if it doesn't occur that quickly, we revert back to, we got to make it happen. So I think that's part of what Max Lucado was talking about in the section about control. The other thing I want to spend some time on, but I'm not going to spend time on it today, because if I get on this, we will be here till 4:00. But it's the whole understanding what our belief systems truly are and how they so define how we respond, how we react, and our behavior towards people, towards situations, towards decisions. And what I'm going to spend some time on Monday. Yeah, because it ties in to this basic Christianity very well. In fact, it ties in very well with the elder son, which we've been talking about, the young son, the elder son. Elder son represents most of us that attend church and are set with certain goal or certain standards and traditions and practices that more times than not are human defined rather than God inspired. And they so impair our eyesight to those that desperately need Christ. So Monday, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this whole idea of what should our belief systems be if we consider ourselves a follower of Christ. So we're going to end it here. I think Alexis did extremely well in addressing the concerns she had. I'm not sure about myself, but we'll deal with it next week. So I hope everyone today remembers what Good Friday represents, because as we get a better understanding of Christ's suffering and what he went through, it gives us a much fresher perspective and truth of what we're going to celebrate on Sunday, which is the resurrection. So I hope you all have a blessed evening, and we'll be back Monday at 4:00.
Yep. Thank you guys for listening.